is Teresita Levy. I'm a professor at Lehman College, and I am thrilled to be here today. My work is all about how Puerto Ricans are activists in their own lives, to make changes in their own lives. And I am joined by this incredible panel, some of who need no introduction. I am joined by the amazing Edna Acosta-Belén, a hero for many of us in the academy. And she requires no introduction.
Thank you.
It is indeed a privilege to be sitting in this panel with her. I'm also joined by Ramón Borges-Méndez from Clark University and by Alessandra Rosa from Lynn University. And we have decided that we will dispense with formal credential nonsense and just get right to the meat of it. So I hope that is okay with you. So what we will do is we will all speak for just a little bit, and then we will open it up to a wider discussion if that is agreeable to everyone. So I wanted to speak about three topics very briefly. When we think about the academy and we think about our role as academics in our agenda as we move forward. And I want to talk about intellectual duty, about communication, and about activism. And I have had the incredible fortune over the last year and a half to spend quite a bit of time in Cuba as we define what bilateral relations are going to look like and what, in particular, our academic relationship is going to look like with universities in Cuba. And I have learned and seen firsthand that all revolutions require intellectuals, whether we like it or not. And some of us don't like it that much. But we need people who are going to think, who are going to study, who are going to analyze, who will contextualize what is happening around us and tell us a larger view, how things have changed through time, how things will change as we move forward, what we have to understand from our past so that we can move into the future. And often it is those of us in the academy that are tasked with this. Sometimes because we are obsessed and think about weird things that nobody else is interested in, and so it is up to us to figure it out. But other times just because people really are looking for meaning and guidance, and not in a condescending way, but in a how do I understand this so that then I can make the changes that I need to make to help in the community or in the rest of the world. And I think it's also our job as intellectuals to really challenge accepted narratives. What is it that we think we know about the Puerto Rican community in the United States? What is it that we think we know about the island? And what is it that we think that we know about the relationship between the two? And it is our job to challenge those things and not to assume that we know what we think that we know, but to question it. And if we don't do it, then I worry about how much is getting lost in the everyday life. So that's the first point, right? Our intellectual duty as academics. The second point is about communication, right? That what we study cannot be only because it is a theme that we are passionate about or something that we're interested or obsessed with, right? And I think all of us here probably can talk about that. But that it must have social impact, right? How will this information educate? How will it impact our community? What is important about what I am studying? Because listen, intellectually, it is all important, right? We all will tell you 50,000 reasons why what we study is important, right? But what will it do to promote change, right? What will it teach that will create one of those moments where you say, aha, I get it. Or how will it inspire? And that if we are not investigating and thinking and writing with those goals in mind, we are losing a major part of what we are supposed to do as intellectuals. And finally, that leads me to the last point that I want to make, which is that we have to be activists. Intellectuals, by definition, have to be activists. We cannot hide in the academy. We cannot hide in the ivory tower. We have to leave the classroom and get into the community. We have to teach our students to be activists. We have to teach each other how to be activists, what we can get involved in, tell each other what we are up to, and tell you what it is that we are up to, those of you who are not academics necessarily. And you know, when I think about this moment today, that we are in this panel here sharing, talking about what it is like to be an academic and what is the role of academics as we move forward into the future in a difficult time for all of us on the island and here in the diaspora. But we are here because students protested, because they demanded that the city answer to who they were That is why we are all in this privileged position in this beautiful building on 119th Street, spending an afternoon, 2 days, talking about our community. Because students said, no more, right? And we cannot forget that. I tell this to my students at Lehman all the time. It was students like you who made this happen. Mm-hmm. We are the first ethnic studies department on the East Coast ever founded at Lehman College, the Department of Puerto Rican Studies. We exist because students said no more. I cannot forget that in my classroom. It doesn't matter what I teach, right? Whether I teach history of Puerto Rico, whether I teach history of the US and Latin America, whether I teach history of the Dominican Republic, I am there because students like my students said no more, right? So they created this space for us. Now it is our duty to create a space that others after us will have so that they can continue the conversation. So I don't want to say anything else. I want to leave my distinguished panelists to do the rest of the work. And I will leave it up to you to decide who wants to go first, and then we'll open for questions after. Okay?
All right.
Would you like to start, Edna?
Sure.
Okay.
We were asked to focus our comments on ideas and strategies for organizing and mobilizing island and stateside Puerto Ricans in higher education for collective action around the pertinent issues surrounding the current fiscal crisis in Puerto Rico. Before I get to the strategies part, I'll begin my brief comments by underscoring two major factors that, in my opinion, are contributing to galvanizing and sustaining a transnational Boricua solidarity movement that is addressing the multifaceted effects of the crisis and demanding sustainable solutions that would respond first and foremost to the well-being of Puerto Ricans rather than to the rapacious greed of the banking and bond investment sectors. The first of these factors is the historical precedent established by the Peace for Vieques movement, a struggle that is emblematic of what Puerto Ricans can achieve from decades of grassroots mobilization and social and political activism that in the late 1990s eventually turned into a transnational solidarity movement that involved both island and stateside Boricuas in defying the power of the US Navy and the Pentagon and successfully achieving one of its major goals, to stop the training bombing practices and ultimately get the US Navy out of Vieques in 2003. The Vieques movement was the first Puerto Rican movement to benefit from the use of social media to carry a message of peace, respect for human rights, and environmental justice that was transnationalized to and beyond the stateside Puerto Rican community to eventually capture the attention of the US mainstream media and that of other countries of the hemisphere and globally. In addition to Vieques, there are also the many campaigns to release Puerto Rican political prisoners. And the most notable example of these transnational alliances and solidarity, or the most recent one, is the Oscar Lopez Rivera case. A second factor, increasingly bringing our island and stateside communities together around the human rights and social justice issues that stems from the effects of the ongoing new millennium Great Migration and the social and political impact that is having on both communities. The new millennium migration has reached levels comparable to the post-World War II Great Migration years, to the extent that 60% of all Boricuas, a total of 5.3 million in 2015, now reside in the United States rather than on the island, where the total population has decreased to 3.5 million. Thus, there are almost 2 million more Puerto Ricans living stateside than in Puerto Rico. While out-migration for Puerto Rico has exacerbated the island's debt crisis due to the loss of tax revenue and human capital, the concomitant increase of the stateside Puerto Rican population has great potential for increasing its political power at local, state, and national levels. It already has resulted in the election of a fifth Puerto Rican to the U.S. Congress from the state of Florida in 2016. Once again, Puerto Ricans de la banda acá y de la banda allá are joining their efforts and raising their voices to tackle a Puerto Rican debt crisis that, as we know, is exacerbating the poverty status of almost half of an aging island population and crippling essential health, education, and social services from those that need them the most, and also crippling the functioning of key government agencies and public corporations. By now, many of us academics and university students have signed countless petitions and offer our support to numerous individual groups or coalitions that are dealing with many different aspects of the debt crisis. Some of those issues include denouncing the shortcomings and imposition of the Congressional Promesa Act of 2016 that created an externally imposed Junta de Control Fiscal, immediately renamed La Junta, the yoke, in Puerto Rican popular lore, to make decisions on austerity measures, since, as we well know, from the beginning, La Junta was more inclined to respond to the demands of hedge fund investors than on the debt's devastating effects on the lives and general welfare of the Puerto Rican people. A second issue that galvanized the support of island and stateside academics and students was denouncing the proposed and crippling budgetary costs to the University of Puerto Rico system, costs that amount to around $5 million, and the cuts to a public education system on the island confronting the prospect of closing around 180 schools. A third issue was supporting demands for an audit of Puerto Rico's $73 million municipal bond debt and an additional $50 million debt from borrowing from the public pension system, to determine the primary culprits in the political and financial elites that led the island to the current debacle. Demands already rejected by La Junta and the island's current governor and legislature. Therefore, the demand for an audit is still an issue to be kept alive in any further collective action. A fourth common cause was pressuring Congress to grant Puerto Rico the bankruptcy protection laws shared by the states of the Union, a path that was included in the Title III of the Promesa Act with the debt restructuring option that the island government is now pursuing. As academics, we can pursue many effective ways of educating and raising consciousness about the multiple effects of the debt crisis among different audiences through our teaching, research, and community service endeavors. As a baby boomer, someone involved in the struggles to make Puerto Rican and Latino studies, women's and sexuality studies, and bilingual education a legitimate part of the academic and educational enterprise back in the early 1970s, when I was still a graduate student. And also increase equal educational opportunities and intersectional diversity in higher education and in our teaching, curricular, and research and professional endeavors. I know that our responsibility to draw the attention to the multiple implications and facets of the Puerto Rican debt crisis should be an ongoing long-term project. This is not something that will take only a couple of years. We're talking here about decades. Whether we do it in the classroom through our scholarship or in the panels of professional conferences or the meetings of community organizations that we happen to be part of. An action agenda from academics should include multiple strategies. And I'm just going to give some examples because of, in interest of time. First, introducing the debt crisis topic into our teaching using multimedia resources, video, social media, academic and newspaper, magazine articles that deal with the causes, the evolution, and consequences of the island's fiscal predicament. Another point would be to develop community service opportunities for students. And also for those who have the expertise to provide training on community organizing to students. Third, having broader discussions about the predatory nature of capitalism, its different intersectional forms of oppression, and the impact of neoliberal policies pushed by the IMF, the World Bank, and other agencies, especially in developing countries, as well as the impact of the Great Recession domestically and globally, and the increasing socioeconomic inequalities of the last 2 decades that continue to widen the gap in the distribution of wealth domestically and globally. Next, making comparisons between Puerto Rico's debt crisis and similar recent crises that have led to bankruptcies in other countries and cities. Immediately, Greece and Detroit come to mind. Having discussions about the constraints of Puerto Rico's colonial status and the concomitant second-class US citizenship treatment of Puerto Ricans when dealing with congressional authority, as well as the ongoing erosion of Puerto Rico's autonomy. Underscoring the efforts of Puerto Rican scholars and other financial experts to develop alternative ideas for dealing with the budget cuts and in articulating a project for sustainable economic development in Puerto Rico. A group of professors from ROM, the University of Puerto Rico in Mayagüez, has recently published a book, Ensayos para una Nueva Economía, published by Ediciones Callejón recently. So we should be paying attention to those ideas too. Engaging in critical discussions about the condition of Puerto Ricans as colonial subjects, and highlighting continuing scholarly efforts to recover and reconstruct the histories of our stateside communities, and to decolonize traditional knowledge and interpretations of the histories, experience, and struggles of our people on the island and the diaspora. We've been doing that for quite a while, but it's an ongoing process. Especially, in debunking the problem-oriented perspectives when describing our socioeconomic and cultural conditions and the negative appraisals of our collective national character. We also have to address the relationship between the debt crisis, the decline in the island's population, and increased migration to the United States during the new millennium. Comparing the structural conditions that contributed to the mid-20th century Great Migration and the new millennium migration, as well as the current and anticipated multiple effects of the latter on our island and stateside communities. Also, and somebody mentioned this in the last panel I attended today a little while ago, continue our efforts to promote knowledge about the diaspora on the island and the particular history of stateside particular history of struggle of survival of stateside Puerto Ricans. Academics are already engaged in organizing panels at professional venues, for example, the Puerto Rican Studies Association, the Latin American Studies Association, Caribbean Studies Association, to give a few examples, from the perspectives of many different disciplines and fields. But we also have to go beyond scholarly audiences and bring these discussions to the classroom, community groups, and the general public, especially in efforts to draw the attention of the mainstream US and international media on the devastating effects of the fiscal crisis on the US citizens of Puerto Rico. Writers and visual artists, musicians are doing their part, and Centro should be commended for assuming a leading role in promoting these efforts by organizing the diaspora summits and giving us this wonderful opportunity de poner nuestro granito de arena and give continuity to these productive exchanges of ideas and strategies. Before ending my remarks, I would like to recognize the work of younger academic activists, Yarimar Bonilla, Marisol Lebron, and Sara Molinari in developing the Puerto Rican syllabus, essential tools for critical thinking about the Puerto Rican debt crisis. I invite you to check their website. In sum, Boricuas are once again, with their characteristic resilience, resisting the effects and constraints of their colonial condition from multiple fronts and forms of activism that involve many different groups and sectors of our island and stateside communities. In doing so, they assert that resistance is never futile, even when sometimes progressive movements may stall or seem elusive or distant in achieving its intended outcomes. History shows us that the forces of social justice and equality for those sectors besieged by multiple forms of oppression will never be silenced or deterred. Thank you.
I'm not going to ever let you go first in another panel.
Why?
If we were playing dominoes, el paso. Right? It's all been said. That's what he meant. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. I have an academic trajectory, but my pathway is always being intimately connected to public policy, international, domestic, national. So I've always been in the pit. I've gone in there and deal with the issues of compromise and negotiations, the difficult negotiations. You win, you lose. I'm always in the grid of that process, and that's what I teach. I'm a professor of policy, urban planning, political economy, stats. So, but I always frame it in the context of the scholar practitioner. That is, whatever I like to teach is something that I also like to show my students, how it works. Whether it is in a small city like Holyoke, whether it is, working in, a region in Southeast Asia, whether it is, analyzing the structure of, Puerto Rican debt, all of the issues with which, I kind of, feel attached to. Nowadays, working, helping public schools, preserve universal nutrition, and working with, how can the schools maximize the subsidies that are available to them in order to feed children. So I like to get my hands very dirty. So in that context, that idea of the scholar practitioner that you kind of allude to is very important, how we convey it to students. The second point is, and talk a little bit more about, is about models of multi-actor connectivity, right? I think to reaffirm the obvious, that's what we're here for. But beyond just the fact that we should work together as a sort of an ideal type, we need to break it down in models of connecting, and I will talk a little bit, university community, university nonprofit sector, university government nonprofit sector, university government nonprofit sector, private sector, right? And in that mix, you don't need them all the time, but it's quite important to understand what are the multiple forms in which you can combine them in the absence of resources which will not be available for quite a long time in Puerto Rico. And I think this is, the issue of this understanding connectivity to me is actually critical, as we've seen how disturbing it's become in the context of the United States and perhaps UK, the use and the specific targeting of misinformation to low social capital populations with the objective of capturing, with the objective of manipulating. It's not a new phenomenon, but it's been particularly new, the way in which we have been able to generate tools that can directly find those people and harness them to the political process, without really giving them any information, but the opposite, complete misinformation, right? So we're using the tools, that we think were there to inform people, social media, which most of us use to inform people, but there are very well-intentioned, very well-endowed forces out there using it to misinform people, right? As we've seen also in Wall Street, very powerful actors using the tools of capitalist engagement to destroy value rather than to create value, and actually make money destroying value, right? Which is a very interchange. But I like to point at 5 things which I think would be very important from the standpoint of getting in there and doing stuff. Number 1 is, how can we as academics provide essential technical support to work in the preparation of programs and policies and proposals which will be necessary to deal with the crisis. In matter of energy, Puerto Rico has, the most expensive, megawatt dollar cost in the Western Hemisphere. In addition to the fact that we are completely dependable on fossil fuels, about 89% of our energy, if not more these days, is fossil fuel. Second, food dependency, right, which is intimately connected to the energy aspect as well. Water. Ironically, we're an island. We get 150 inches of rain more a year, and we find ourselves in droughts or losing almost from source to consumption about 40% of the water that we generate, with a system that hasn't received pretty much any investment in about 50 years, right? So I think we as academics can do a great deal, working in there. At the same time, I think that we need to create community university models of collaboration that engage the newer generations in that new thinking of, well, actually it's not new thinking, because el Teatro Rodante de la Universidad de Puerto Rico, was there, in 1930, right? And there was a very prestigious trajectory of university academics connecting with the communities, has disappeared throughout the years, but I think bringing that back would be very, very useful. The second, so that issue of how we connect ourselves as academics working, the ins and outs of proposal development, formulating programs and projects in the context of new models of university community, bringing other actors into the mix, I think is one key aspect in which we can work. The second is that in the absence of the state, in the absence of a decent private sector, and in the absence of many organizations that have been devastated by the crisis and previous attacks upon civil society in Puerto Rico, we do need to give attention on how we're going to redevelop the nonprofit sector. And not thinking in the nonprofit sectors as a future subcontractor of the state, which is what we are now facing. We are going to call the nonprofit sector so they can take care of what we are no longer going to do, as a result, overwhelming and annihilating the capacity of the nonprofit sector to be the voice of civil society, but simply become an executioner of public policies paid by the state. That's a very important part. There are several nonprofits that are suffering greatly. The cooperative sector is in deep jeopardy with respect to the monies they have invested and the monies that are sort of pending out there. There's a very weak foundation sector, which is still very much a reflection of the interests of the people who put up the money, right? There hasn't yet been the maturity of a 501c3 sector that we could say has a relatively autonomous, identity in terms of doing, or carrying on visions of public, affairs and of the common good that are not just simply the reflection of the FRS, right? To give you a name. The third point is, how are we going to create a couch for the large numbers of students that, whether we like it or not, are going to be, in some way expelled by the forthcoming university crisis. I mean, we are going to be cutting $430 million over the next 2 years, which represents an average of 60% of the public university budget. That is going to hurt. It's going to hurt a lot, right? So the extent to which, if I can bring students, and rescue students, unfortunately there are going to be many, and I'm being very realistic here, some of them, if I can rescue them, bring them up here and connect them to my program, I'll do that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever I can. Right? So I think that of how we connect to those students out there that are in the middle of a turmoil. I am myself product of that, of the 1981 strike of the University of Puerto Rico, right? So I'm ready to do that, and I really want to do that. The fourth point that I want to mention is the contribution that we can make to recreate the culture of public service in Puerto Rico, right? Whether we have all come to a point that we are sick with the corruption, we're sick with the mismanagement, we're sick with the misuse of public resources, we will have to reconstruct the state. We need it, right? And we will need it from the very bottom up. We will need new generations becoming actors in the municipal arena. The municipal arena is completely devastated. We will need to create new avenues for reincorporating youngsters into that as public policy managers at the local level, right? Critical if we are now making a proposal to give back to to give the municipalities the power to do housing and property tax assessment in a culture of corruption. It's just putting the fox inside of a hen house. It's not going to function. So we need a new generation of leadership to take their helms of public policy at the local and regional level. I agree with Edna a great deal with this idea of how do we create an alternative narrative that so far, with respect to the debt crisis, is being very much about putting into perspective solutions that come out of the repertoire of the Washington Consensus. Mm-hmm. Structural adjustment. Even the actors are the same. Ann Kruger, what's her name? Jaresko from Ukraine. Finance minister, who's now in charge of the management of the control board. These are all, Argentina as an example. Argentina cannot be an example with Puerto Rico. Argentina is the world largest producer of soy. It's the fifth largest producer of meat. These are gigantic, powerful, resource-endowed countries. So I think repositioning, what are going to be some of the tools that we will use in order to manage ourselves out of this crisis is going to be quite an important, analytic project. And finally, I want to touch upon how can we, as academics, will have to provide analysis with no access to data, right? That's going to be a big challenge, right? What's that?
She agrees with you in the back.
She agrees with me. It's going to be, we have no forensic analysis of that. We don't know how much is gone through, it's been siphoned through.
You won't be able to see the budgets that are
You
coming
will
out
not
yet.
be able to see the budget for which you're going to be voting. You are not going to be, there is going to be a big challenge to do research and analysis in the absence of transparency. Mm-hmm. Right? Freedom of Information Act, yeah, sure, whatever you want, right? So that will be something in which we will have to be very, very militant with respect to, the avenues that we create in order to maintain a conversation with civil society that is founded in sound and solid analysis of, the economic, the social, the political conditions, and of all the myths, as you say, that are constantly perpetuated by this, idea of, el puertorriqueño dócil nowadays again.
Yeah.
So I think that is that's my list. And
It's a good list.
and I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I'm last.
But not least.
I don't have a list in particular. I do have a little bit more of my experience. I am directly, my work focuses on student activism. And, I always joke with my husband, why is a university going to hire you? If a strike comes, you're going to be completely opposite to them. That's the idea behind my work, precisely. But I always tell him I'm trying to create bridges. I'm always trying to close down that gap of academia, being in academia, and being the activist over there. We need that. We need people to study what's being done, but also be part of it, because there's no way of understanding it unless you're part of it. Because there's, we're still in a privileged position. I always talk about this because we always come back and we get that space. We have that moment of reflection that people that are there 24 hours, 7 days a week don't have that moment of peace of mind, you know, when you have a helicopter flying over you or whatnot. But more precisely because I want my work to reflect them and to help them in whatever it is. So I'm not writing for academia, even though I am in academia, because I'm taking whatever I get of tools that I learn to help whatever I see that catches my attention, in this case, student activism, internet activism, or what it is. So I see that kind of bridge, academia and community, or whatever activism, in particular student activism, in particular the UPR, for me. But I also see it about the island and the diaspora. So me being born and raised in the island and having been all college experience here in the States or in Spain, being part of a diaspora, but not considering myself part of that diaspora because I'm always very closely tied to the islands. I'm like, no, I'm just studying over there, but I'm always going back home. That's back home for me. But seeing that big divide, particularly from the island over here, but also from here to the island, and how precisely in the case of Vieques, in the case of Oscar Lopez, like, we need that, closing that gap. We need that bridge again. And precisely in this moment that we are, that there are a lot more Puerto Ricans coming over, a lot younger, you know, families, we need to close that gap. In particular about the, oh, tú eres de aquí o de allá. No, we're Puerto Ricans, you know, and we need to struggle as Puerto Ricans, and they were talking in another one, we need to include Dominicans, and we need to include Haitians, because they're also part of Puerto Rico, and they're also being screwed over by this administration and what's going on. So for me is that notion of creating bridge, and we all have different platforms. The artists have their artwork and or murals or whatnot. So as a professor, that is my platform. So what can I do? I can teach, I can try to research and see how I can provide something, you know, not for me. I hate the publishing part, which we need to do, but I try to make it not as something that I will get out of it, but actually that's something that will be useful. So I made public my work as soon as possible, and I write in a way that people can actually understand, like anybody can pick up and be like, oh, I don't know anything about anthropology, but oh, I could kind of see what you're writing about. I could kind of follow you, you know, and I test that on my mom in particular, because she has nothing to do with what I do, and I give it to her, and if she reads it, she's like, okay, yeah, I can understand. I'm like, okay, I've done my job now, in this sense. So for me in particular, being here, I always catch myself being divided because I'm here, but I'm also there. You know, I'm nonstop finding out what's going on, like being on top, asking the activists, because sometimes we might have an idea of how to help, but it's not necessarily how they want to be helped or need to be helped. So really just asking, like, what do you need? What can I do as I'm over here? You know, I am, you know, like I said, raising awareness. May Day. What did I do? Oh, great excuse. I'm going to do a teach-in in my class. That has nothing to do with activism because I teach theory, in this case, psychological and sociological in this class, in freshmen. So I was like, I'm just going to do them and teach them about what is May Day because none of them knew the history about May Day here in the States and that we celebrate Labor Day in September 4th. And then what did I do? I tie in the case of Puerto Rico. And precisely at that moment, I decided to put on Facebook Live to one of the activists, and they were in the confrontation with the police. And all the students were like, oh my God, this is important. Like, they probably didn't hear anything about May Day, but at that moment, they were like, this is happening in Puerto Rico, like, right now. Like, that really shook them. So in that case, definitely, I feel that's how I use academia in this case, to close that bridge precisely with social media, like you said, communication. We unfortunately do need the publishing, and you know, it's part of the work that we do, but it's also a good way to reflect. So, you know, I'm wearing a shirt that I was talking to one of our friends here, and it kind of died out a little bit, but it was some of the student activists from 2010 that created this collective, Portavoces, that were trying to really write from their perspective, from their own experiences about what happened, about now having passed through that, what it meant. And something that I've realized is that we always talk about engaging the youth, which I still consider me hopefully part of it, but they are engaged. They know what's going on. They are more knowledgeable than a lot of the politicians that we have in Congress, even in the island.
Oh, well,
So
thank
we don't need to engage them. I think we need to really just find a way to be there for them and support them. And if our experience can help them in any way, by all means, and if we can open doors for them, because they will definitely need doors, like us young academics coming into this field, that's what I'm trying to do. You know, I don't want to impose myself onto them, but I definitely do respect them academically, civically, even more so, because they are there 24/7, and that, you know, I've been there a couple times when I can't go to the island, and so I went through a process. I used to introduce myself as an ally. I'm like, look, I'm an ally. I'm a graduate student at this time. I'm gonna be doing researching you guys, and you know, if I can interview you and doing all this stuff. And then I went from that to being part of it, and I cannot turn that switch off anymore. You know, so you can talk to anybody that really experience it from the inside, whether positively or negative, because you have negative outcomes. You need that self-care that we now keep hearing about, because the fight is not a short fight. You know, we need to take care of each other. We need to help out, and we need to help them in different ways. Emotionally, we've had a couple of young suicides, 2 suicides actually, of activists that have happened. So, you know, as the situation is getting worse, this is something that's going to keep happening. Now we have healthcare that's not going to even include mental disorders. So again, we need to support each other in different ways, and how to build different bridges, especially politically. We're very much divided politically. How can, you know, I have my own beliefs, and I think, you know, we're a colony and we shouldn't be, and all that stuff. But how can we still put that maybe aside, in the sense that there are certain needs that need to be met at this moment that we don't have? When you mention food, water, you know, what's going to happen to us in the island right now?
Big Burger King.
It's going to get to the point that we don't, so we really need to start developing more bridges, in my sense, and not see them as we need to engage them, but really respect them on their own and what they're doing, and really be like, you know what, hats off to you, because I don't know if I would have been in that situation if I could actually deal with everything that you're doing at this moment. So those were my 2 cents. So I do try to incorporate academia and try to break that gap in that sense. But I can't take the activism out, you know, so I consider myself an activist researcher. And sometimes my people say, oh, you're too focused on Puerto Rico, you need to expand more. I'm like, I can't. Like, this is what I want to do. Like, this is, you know, like my passion. And until it changes, maybe once, when ideally where I want to see Puerto Rico be and do, then I might be like, okay, you know, now what? What am I going to do now? I don't have to, you know, do this anymore. So I guess let me look for something else.
That would be a good problem.
I know, right? I'm hoping to get to that point to be like, okay, now what? But until that time, you know, this is what I see myself doing, and it's very stressful. You know, I always say I could have studied like maybe food or sports or you know, something like that. That's a little bit more peace of mind, but I wouldn't change it in that sense. So those are my 2 cents in that sense.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to everybody. And now it's up to you to chime in and ask questions, make comments, challenge us into what we think we know.
I have to leave. I'm in Palm Beach. And I was actually coming to just give you my info, and if you could give me your info, I have to go get the plane.
Okay.
Do you have a card?
I ran out of cards, but I do have my email.
Okay.
Yes.
And something, I gotta go, but there is a divide between the diaspora and how Puerto Ricans in the island see the diaspora. And I think academia can bridge that gap. And it's not so much about teaching people in Puerto Rico what diaspora has been doing here for 50, 60 years. But it's about humanizing them.
Yeah.
And it's about, they didn't left the island because you're less than, or you're being abandoned by them.
Or yo no me quito, or that. Yeah.
It's because some of them feel that they were pushed out. In my case, I felt I was drowning, and I needed to leave.
Sure.
So, and I think academia needs to touch that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Have a safe flight.
Thank you.
Yes, in the back.
Make it brief. One.
Would you tell us who you are?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, I remember you.
Yes, I was like, I know.
And I have a full-time job in academia. Woohoo! Yes. So one, 25% of PhDs have full-time jobs. Two, in terms of echoing that concern, there are multiple diasporas. My mother's experience is not the
Yep.
diasporic experience
No,
of those
that's right.
communities. So if you can touch on that, and what that means in this conversation. For everyone. That's all I got.
It's very true, very true.
Would anybody like to address that? The different
Well,
narratives?
that is always going to be there because Puerto Rican migration is a continuous, almost perennial
Process.
process now. And there's always going to be those generational differences. So, each generation is going to have their own views and perspectives and experience different things experience certain things in a different way than our parents.
Well,
I
with,
have-
with
sorry. No, I have a friend. I met him being in the States when I came to study my undergrad. He's older than me. The first thing he said, he's like, you're one of the first Puerto Ricans from the island that I can actually have a conversation with that does not discriminate me, as sees me as like a New Yorican Puerto Rican. Once I introduced him to other people and we exchanged a lot, especially through Facebook, ironically enough, he's like, you've made me reconnect to Puerto Rico a lot better because when I would go, I would feel pushed out. I would feel like not wanted, I'm not welcome here because I am a gringo in cultural sense. So that's why I mean about closing. I know the people that are coming now might be a different demographic. You have some people that are saying they're more intellectual. You have other people that are saying no, it's actually the poor, developed people that are actually struggling to survive in the island that are coming out. So you do have a very spectrum of migration here. It's not just a specific one type. But the experience is definitely a little bit different in the sense, first of all, they're also migrating to different parts, a little bit in
Yes,
the south, warmer
that's right.
weather, first of all.
That's right.
Yes.
So that experience in itself is completely different, but I feel also the fact that for me, even the whole term diaspora, like studying here, I didn't even consider Puerto Ricans being a diaspora here because for us as the US, it's kind of like, yeah, we can come back and forth. It's not really, like I didn't even envision it like that. So, so I feel like if we continue to see like, yes, this is a movement. Yes, now I'm living here in a way, but that, I always makes me cry to this day, en mi viejo San Juan. I always think of that line that says, una tal partida es una extraña nación, pero mi corazón se quedó allí, and I'm always there. And I know Puerto Ricans that have never been to the island, that have a love for the island like no other.
Right.
So I think we need to build on that strength, on that unity, on that love to make it, to really survive and be what we can be, not continue like, oh no, you're from there, or no, tú te quitaste, tú te fuiste pa Estados Unidos, or like, you're not even from the island, like you've never been here, you don't even know how to speak Spanish, like.
But things have changed a lot since the 1970s, since the creation of Puerto Rican Studies and the Centro. That was one way of establishing connections between, island and stateside academics and students. I remember when in the 70s there was a lot of ignorance, even more so than now, about the diaspora, and the images of the diaspora were always connected to West Side Story.
True,
and
it's
gangs and poverty.
I still get that song, like, oh,
Right.
I want to live in America.
Exactly. Exactly. So, a lot of those things have changed. We're still not at the point that we would like to be, but I think it shows you what a long process it is
Thanks, yeah.
to get the island engaged in seeing the diaspora as an important part of being Puerto Rican.
Sure.
Okay? and to understand that right now the diaspora is in a better situation in terms of political power to influence, solutions to the debt crisis.
I wanted to, when you meant that 28% of people only get PhDs,
Full-time job.
No, jobs.
Get jobs.
jobs.
Yeah.
Which is true. I mean, there is a tendency to greater use. Universities have even more adjunct professors than they have full-time professors. Yet, we're also beginning to see the way in which a number of, your generation, Edwin's generation, and that generation.
Don't say our generation.
Yeah, it's just like,
Please don't.
way back to Frank's.
We're the same generation. Okay.
to Frank's generation, how we have started to mature as groups of educated Puerto Ricans who started to occupy important positions in institutions of higher education, which we now can leverage as a very important resource in order to, go after, to help and rescue the generation that is going to be suffering from the beat down, of the structural crisis. So yes, we need to bring the deans of Puerto Rican. We need to talk to the chancellors. We need to talk to the presidents. We need to talk to the, to the professors. We need to, begin using the maturity of that diaspora as it has entered, to run very important public institutions, foundations, and, even corporations. I think that conversation is very important. Moving away from a little bit of that sort of, the hungry dividend diaspora. Well, it matures, it settles, it grows, it accumulates institutional capability. I think it's important that we also dig into that part and connect that part to the generations that are coming up.
That's great, thank you. So I have 3 people waiting, and I think Edwin, because he's our host, I will play let Edwin have the word first. But I see you 1, 2, 3, okay? And then I see someone.
So, first I want to make a quick comment, which is to say that we got Emerita to cover this conference yesterday, actually for 3 days. But today we got front page on the newspaper.
Great.
Pretty good. A little bit too radical for my taste, but that's okay. I will say that just to exemplify how things have changed. They're looking at us now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
They're looking
Exactly.
at us because where else are they going to look, right? Having said that, I have a question for the panel. So what is it that you are going to do? Because I know what we're doing. And I know you're going to make recommendations for Centro to do. But I'm asking you, before you tell me what you want us to do, what is it that you are going to do? Right? Hey.
So do I have to go first because I'm the moderator? Probably, right? I think very much like Alessandra, I think, and some of the things, everything that you all said resonated with me. But Edna was talking about a process of decolonization and a process of radicalization, which I think go hand in hand. So that the more you learn about what is happening in Puerto Rico, you have no choice but to become an activist, and no choice but to become a radical, and no choice but to become decolonized and talk about capitalism and structural problems and all of these things, right? Which if you had asked me 20 years that I would be sitting here saying that, I would have been like, no way, what are you talking about? But this is what happens, right? So every single day, I try to do something that I think will have an impact, whether it's speak to 250 people in a lecture hall in Cuba about the crisis in Puerto Rico and how they can help. And they have helped for 60 years, they have been helping, right? They have not let us forget who we are and remind us in the eyes of the world what it is that we are capable of doing. My work is committed to speaking about activism, about the historical trajectory of activism back in 1898 and 1917 and 1920 and 1930 when we didn't think that we were activists because we were supposedly docile.
All right.
So I remind my students in the Bronx every single day that they do not come from this history, that this is not their history. So participate in panels, have a public voice, post on Facebook, as silly as it may be.
Right.
These things have impact. Challenge my friends in the island who are unbelievably privileged and don't think that they are. Sometimes that's not so nice, but so be it. Challenge my family to think about what it is that they do and the choices that they make. That is my commitment. Teach my children who are Puerto Rican, who are New Yorkers, proudly so, that this is where they come from. That is what I do every day and what I will continue to do.
Well, I like to deliver by truck or train. I like to.
I like it.
So, no, we've started a conversation with some faculty at the University of Puerto Rico Mayagüez campus, various community-based organizations in the southern part of the island, specifically around Salinas. And we started a conversation around how can we put together a team of people in order to, take a shot at some of the National Science Foundation grants, connecting food, water, and electricity. In the context of developing, real solid scientific approaches with sustainability, that we can begin taking a bite out of the juggernaut, which is, expensive energy, expensive water, expensive food. Right? Can we think of that, or could we just continue thinking that, oh my God, we're a 100 by 35 island with no economies of scale, with whatever we think about, even planting a lettuce, we're already losing money. Well, we there's gotta be something there. Let's just scratch the surface. So my work is essentially trying to grow those partnerships in the context of leveraging resources here that are available to us. Yeah.
Well, in my case, if I'm going to just narrow it down, because I'm supposed to be retired, but I'm really not, as you can see.
Good luck with that.
Right. Continue, my research and teaching activities with students, my activities that focus on documenting the history and experiences of the diaspora, and trying to create, increased knowledge and also awareness of that history for among island Puerto Ricans. I think that's my kind of activism. Training students, especially doctoral students, is one of the things that are very important to me, and I continue doing it after retirement.
And Alessandra?
So I kind of mentioned it a little bit. I'm in a very small university that I didn't even know existed until I actually applied to it. So it's a very conservative, as you can imagine, in Boca, Raton. So I'm negotiating and navigating how to be political without being too political, because it's still my first year. But I'm always throwing it in there, and I'm also getting, more involved. We have started to develop a social justice minor that's going to be up and running for next year, and we are also working on this project called Project Civitas, which is about bringing civility to the university campus and beyond, because we also incorporated Boca Raton in that sense, and we got the major involved and whatnot. So I'm like one of the lead faculties behind those things. So that's kind of, I see, trying to incorporate my activism into the academia here where I am. But I'm also, hoping when I get to teach one of the class for the minor, to bring in the Puerto Rico case, because this is my case. Like I mentioned it in the teaching that I did, but also in a way, this is here. But I'm also, like I said, very much invested in what's going on in the island, so I'm always asking, what can I do? Whether it's the faculty that's in the UPR right now, Apple, supporting the students on strike without just by being there, or also the student activists, whether it's Radio Huelga or the people, whatever it is that they need or they want, or what I'm also in contact with students here. Like I know that CUNY, they had a Skype in with some of the students activists yesterday. There's a Rutgers group that's very active, and I'm meeting with them by Skype from Florida, because I don't know that many people as activists in Florida, especially not in my area that much. And I do have, I'm not so active because I am a recent mom. So I see that as another type of activism, because I am going to teach my son, how to be a feminist and how to talk about this and how to, everything that's going on in that sense. And I also teach my students, I see it as a learning experience. I'm like, wait until you're ready to engage in everything that it is to be a parent. In that sense, because I know a lot of them don't have sexual education until they probably get to college. So that's another type of activism that I'm doing on the side in that sense. But definitely, like I said, teaching is my platform, research is my platform. I'm not doing the research right now because of all the things that I have, but I'm definitely trying to incorporate it into the social justice minor that we're implementing at Project Civitas. So that's kind of how I do it.
Thank you. Yes.
First of all, I want to congratulate Edwin on this fine summit. I was one of the students that fought for this in
Awesome.
1971.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I do think change has happened.
Yes.
I think we need to be a little bit less comfortable though. We got too comfortable.
Absolutely.
And, but I do see change, and I think that question that Edwin has asked applies to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to do now? How are we going to engage our communities? I, for one, as an artist, I can look to the Mexican project and the NPR project and see that that has to be revived. An open communication by artists has to be initiated with the communities. I'm honored to see and meet Edna Acosta-Belén. I never thought I would meet you. You were the shining star of my thesis, because my thesis has to do with Julio Martinez, who was an artist in the 30s here from Puerto Rico. Became part of the Ashcan School Painters, and I think is very underrated. And you spoke of him in your Diapora of Plática Puerto Rican. I totally disagree with Alessandra. I think we have that, I agree with you and I disagree with you. I think we have that wonderful love towards Puerto Rico and our roots, but we do not ask responsibility of the Puerto Rico for that love.
You don't ask
There's a lot there, when you get something free,
Okay.
you don't appreciate it.
Okay.
And there's a lot of people over there that have no idea of the things that were, important things that have been mentioned here. That Speaker Ryan and Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi did work, and they opened up the Title III situation. They have no idea that those things are important in Puerto Rico. That their bankruptcy depends on the fact that these things are kept alive, and that they need to push and they need to be mobilized, and they need to know that the diaspora is doing that. And there is nothing going on over there. There is no responsibility with that.
Oh, by all
You
means,
get it
that's
free.
that's the whole point. I'm trying to get the people to not see them as New Yorkers or push them away. I'm trying to encourage that bridge.
Exactly, but how do we positively do that? We have to find channels. For example, I was asking Evan yesterday, because I've been a Puerto Rican history teacher over there for like 20 years. And I'm the only one talking about Arturo Schoenberg or Edna or Jesus Colon.
Pura.
Belpre. This is important. This is important to be included in the Puerto Rican history department over there.
Yeah.
Of
I mean,
course.
that's one little step we could take.
Yeah.
If somehow we can get the money over here to pay for a course over there, since they don't
That would
have
be
the money over there.
That would be
But
nice.
for that to be incorporated as an important course, the diaspora Puerto Rican of the United States,
Yeah,
because they don't know.
yeah, you're right. And maybe that is something that Centro can help with.
And that is
It's
something that is.
online already.
Oh, there we
Yeah.
go.
Next, the cultural ambassador, the cultural ambassador.
Cultural ambassador.
Okay,
That's
so,
something
so we have,
Because
I,
the money is not there, but perhaps maybe we could start something. We could
Sure.
start a movement of consciousness that is so important, because then that'll be happening. Then that goodness that you talk about can be more appreciated on that level, and maybe they will pay
And
attention to
a
me.
lot of Puerto Ricans here have had more victories in the activism than we know about, and that would definitely help bring more
I was in the
encouragement.
marcha, by the way. I was there, and I fought for those UPR students.
so I see like 10 hands, and I am so excited about that, but we have 4 minutes.
Yeah.
We have
A
4,
resolution to propose.
Oh.
That this commission here bring to the plenary the resolution to request the governor of Puerto Rico and the Junta Central to resign the $450 million cuts to the University of Puerto Rico.
yeah, I agreed. So we have, I will mention that, so thank you. I think that's a great
Yes.
suggestion. So we have 4 minutes now. So I know that you were waiting patiently for a long time, and so were you. You're okay? And then I know you're next. I saw you from way ahead. And then I've got Zoe in the back, and then you. So why don't we briefly do whatever it is that you want to say or ask, and then we'll try to summarize at the very end, and then we have to wrap up by 3:30.
I'm gonna pass for the second time.
Teresita.
Thank you so much.
Teresita, get Luis Reyes to over here.
Who?
Luis Reyes over here.
Over here?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here, and I keep saying I'm very proud that Puerto Rican is present. My name is Elizabeth Edna Javier Sánchez de Familia en Guayama, Puerto Rico. That's my name.
Thank you.
Pero, I just got a light today, and the light that I got today is that when I heard, what happened in Puerto Rico, it affected me emotionally. Other personal things I could say, we don't have time. And I said, I want to do something. Tengo que hacer algo. ¿Qué está pasando aquí? Esto no es justificado. ¿Qué pasa? And one place that I found that they really put a lot is this organization, the leadership of Mr. Melendez. And, they were doing a lot of issues. I mean, I'm impressed. I'm very touched. And then the reason I got a light is because I said, well, let me do with the Puerto Rican parade. Because Puerto Rican parade, I could get as many people.
Sure.
I could circulate things in the, to voting. I could leave a message. So much art that we could express in the Puerto Rican parade. So, but on the other side, you know what I just realized? Wait a minute, hold it. People with the Puerto Rican parade, they don't get paid. They got to do other things. That's the light I got today. Because when I tried to reach some of my ideas and things that could make things happen, because I like action, okay? But today I found the light again, because when you produce an education, I said, you know what? Yeah, education is a good way. And I think that the Professor Melendez, when he, got up and he said, and clicked again, that it's a message to give to you with the same respect to the, Professor Lewis, Acosta, Professor Borges, Professor Rosa, that we have a reason and a purpose in our life, especially at this time. And the time to everybody is action. Action with
Absolutely.
intelligence. It's
Absolutely.
not by killing, we have our emotions, or other expressions that we may have, but the education of our intelligence to use it. And for example, we could continue educate the professors or the students. I like the theory of Professor Melendez, who they presented what they call the ambassador. That was wow, that's real good. That's another good one. So maybe it's something that you can do too.
Sure.
It could be done for the students at different levels, from an elementary to now.
Absolutely.
And also, it could be the context of get the students to get the above. They are the future. And just like I presented, I have to mention a few minutes in conclusion, is that I mentioned when I was in the group of the Puerto Rican parade, I said, what are you holding? When you give me all this information, I'm going to be in the parade, I'm screaming or yelling or whatever. I like the idea of silence. That's another thing. One moment of silence. But, and I said, wait a minute, why can't I get information that other organizations were present in history? Couldn't there can be like a sheet
Sure.
of the brochure before that day, that everybody on TV, newspaper, we know who's first, who's second, who's gonna be here. Because in history, while we're here, we're present, we're doing something. And it just clicked, in conclusion, it just clicked that it's not only for, Professor Melendez, which is very excellent, you gotta look into this, but the issues that I have to give you a sense and a little push, which you have presented, and what you do, and I thought, but there's something in our mind. And the intelligence we have to use is not a battle with a punch, even though we can knock someone with a punch. It's the silence of the intelligence.
Absolutely.
So please continue with the professor and other people as myself. We want to do something. I mean, I completed my professor, but I have an intelligence and ability, even though I have deficits, to do something in my community and let these leaders come together and tell the Puerto Rican parade, or tell the Professor Melendez, or direct them to get people find their reason purpose as a Puerto Rican person.
So thank you so much, and it's 3:30, so we have to wrap up. Meet us at the plenary, and we will try to finish out this conversation.
I forgot to mention